Welcome to Women, Technology, and Access to Justice, a seminar put together by the Institute for African Women in Law in collaboration with Barefoot Law, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. My name is Ann Williams. I'm a retired U.S. Court of Appeals judge who works full-time in the area of rule of law in Africa. Technology, which is the focus of our seminar, has over time increasingly been deployed to solve pressing human development challenges, from climate change and environmental conservation to the health sector, education, and how the government provides services to its citizens. In the legal field, technology is changing the way legal services are delivered. Law firms like mine have adopted the use of technology for tracking and managing clients' cases and drafting basic contracts. Courts throughout the world have embraced the use of virtual meeting platforms to conduct case sessions. The not-for-profit legal providers are increasingly adopting technology that makes its services more efficient and sustainable and improves access to justice. The assumption is that technology provides or equalizes access for all in the same manner through the dynamics of power, privilege, and systemic bias. It sometimes means that for women, access to technology is limited. Therefore, innovations that are built on the basis of technology as an equalizer inherently carry a blind spot. Despite the increase in women's access to technology, there are still blind spots, continuing barriers to women's access to information, legal services, and justice. Through several innovations built on digital and other technologies, Barefoot Law is expanding access to justice for women and other vulnerable groups by making legal information easier to find, easier to understand, and easier to apply to resolve their legal problems. These include innovations such as the use of interactive voice response, short message service, unstructured supplementary service data, and you'll learn what all those things mean shortly, social media platforms, radio and mobile applications for virtual meetings with lawyers. This panel will examine the role of the technological innovations by critical actors in increasing access to justice. And I'm so pleased to welcome our talented and experienced panelists, Rhoda Namboze, Director of Development at Barefoot Law in Uganda, Nancy Kanyago, Legal Advisor, Law Development Section, Governance and Peace Directorate of the Commonwealth Secretariat, Tatiana, Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice Officer, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and Leah Molatseli, Head of Business Development and at Legal Interact in South Africa. So Rhoda, I hope I have not slaughtered your last name, but I want to turn to you first and ask you to briefly introduce yourself and share with our audience what you do, and then talk about what inspired the idea of Barefoot Law. Tell us about your journey in becoming a leader in the use of digital technology for promoting access to justice, and share with us some of the unique challenges that women face in assessing justice. Rhoda, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Judge Williams. Hello, everyone. I am honored to be a part of this panel. We have very distinguished guests. Thank you for attending, and also thank you for hosting this webinar and for having us. Judge Williams, you got my name right the first time. It's Rhoda Namboze. So I work with Barefoot Law, as Judge Williams has touched on. We are a nonprofit based in Uganda that provides free legal information and guidance using technology and support, using technology and innovation. And the reason we started, like it grew off of a need to make sure that legal information is in the hands of the most vulnerable. So there's a realization that many people don't know their rights. Many people don't know what the law says about very many things, just because of the nature of how the law works and how the law is. So it's complicated, it's complex, and so the organization was founded to ensure that people are able to not only understand, but able to use the law to protect themselves. And so our mission is to get the law to protect the most vulnerable. And we do this by first getting aspects of the law, whether it is from a trending issue that is, that's making the rounds on either news or social media, or having understood different trends that are happening in the legal space. And we take certain bits of the law and we simplify it. So we break it down to the most simple, most not basic form that it can be, and then we disseminate it across our different channels. So we, in a bid to make sure everyone is able to access it, we try and cover as many bases as possible in which people can reach our services. So we are on social media, we use web-based platforms like the internet, email, WhatsApp, and also for those that don't have, for example, access to the internet, we use SMS, or like on feature phones, you can still access our services. And also, like Judge Williams had mentioned, the IVR system, which is a voice system where someone can call in and either listen to certain aspects of the law in a simple manner in different languages, and they're able to then understand what certain provisions of the law say. And this broadcasting of the law in a simplified manner then usually generates questions, because we realize that in not understanding the law, not even knowing the law, you don't realize that you have a legal problem in the first place. And so in understanding what the law says about certain things, it sparks, certain queries of, oh, wait, okay, so you said this, but I have a similar issue, but this is the what I'm experiencing. And so we have a team of lawyers that are on standby to address and handle specific legal queries from the different users that reach back out to us as a result of the information that we broadcasted. And so our aim is to ensure that in people being able to access the law, they're able to empower themselves, and they're able to develop legal solutions to their justice needs. And we've been doing this for the past 9 years. And so far we have reached over 950,000 users with legal information. And in our outreach, we have been able to handle over 20,000 actual legal cases from our legal team. And so, and as we conducted our work, we realized that there are certain inherent biases that ultimately come about using technology and innovation. So at least in the second year of operation, we realized that over 80% of our users were actually male. And in looking deeper into why this is, we developed these solutions because there is an active need, but then not realizing that there are certain barriers that actually actively work against women being able to access this information just because of the platforms that we use. So from women, for example, in rural communities not owning phones, or not owning their own phones, or the inability to just access the internet, and so these interventions that were put in place unintentionally ended up leaving out a certain portion of the users that we wanted to reach. And so this forced us to rethink and to come up with deliberate innovations and interventions that are specifically geared towards women, because of those inherent barriers that women ultimately end up facing when they try and interface with technology. And so one of the initiatives that we came up with is what's called the Levuti, which is legally empowering women using technology and innovation. And what this did is we looked at many of the reasons that women weren't able to access our services, and one of them was a lack of access to technology. And so we decided to bring our services closer to the women. And so we designed, outreach, community sensitization initiatives that involved us going into the communities and speaking with women about their different rights. We conducted will writing exercises. And also in that process, being able to explain to them the ways in which they actually can still get in touch with us, whether it is by meeting with community elders that we had put in place to be the point person for them to reach out to us, radio shows, and so essentially trying to understand how we could bring our services closer to the women, and also in a bid to curb some of the legal issues that women did face in the communities. Another thing that we designed were providing community mediators. So because many of the issues that ended up being faced, at least at the grassroots level, can actually be resolved using the informal justice system. And so we trained community mediators to provide gender sensitive or gender deliberate and gender intentional mediations, and being able to be cognizant of some of the things that women specifically go through when they are faced with legal questions and legal queries, to be able to handle them in a more intentional and conscious way. So our mission is to get the law to provide to get the law to protect the most vulnerable people. And once again, I'm very happy to be on this panel. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rhoda. And so since you've had that approach in essentially bringing Barefoot Law to the women, have you seen an increase in the number of women that are taking advantage of what Barefoot Law has to offer?
Yep, I'm happy to announce that we went from 20% to we're currently at just over 40% of our users being women.
All right, and one other question: the typical case that you said, over 900,000 inquiries. So typically, what are people asking about? What are the sort of typical issues that would come into you at Barefoot Law?
Yeah, so it ranges from issues of succession and inheritance to employment contracts to understanding tenancy rights. It varies broadly, especially in geographical locations, also in the time of year. We've been able to get some trends based on the data that we've collected over the years. And so it's very, very, very broadly, because we also handle something I didn't mention. We handle all aspects of the law. We are law agnostic, and so people will reach out to us about how to write a will, or whether my landlord can evict me, or how to go about buying land. And so it's very, very broadly, but yeah, actually they tend to on a proportionate level, I would say many of them are, especially in the urban areas, are about employment and business and succession, whereas in grassroots or relatively remote areas, it could range from, again, succession to domestic violence to GBV and property.
And finally, there are a lot of inquiries, over 900,000, and you said 20,000 cases. So what's the difference in that?
So the 900 are people or verifiable users that have received our information, our broadcast wide blasts, information dissemination. And the 20,000 are people that have gone in touch with us with specific legal matters that our team has walked them through to a point of either resolution or is currently ongoing.
All right, thank you so much, Rhoda. I want to now turn to Leah. Leah, the argument is sometimes made that women are disadvantaged in accessing technology due to poverty, social, cultural barriers. How can innovators in this field ensure inclusive use of digital technology for promoting access to justice? Rhoda mentioned that a lot of women didn't have cell phones or didn't have access to the internet. What's your response to that? How you promote it in this area?
Thank you so much for the question. So yeah, my name is Leah and I'm from South Africa. I'm head of business development at Legal Interact. I think the conversation really has to do with creating awareness. Awareness is important, particularly when it comes to issues of diversity and inclusiveness. And it really depends on the specific steps within which you can consider. I'm talking from the stage of development, from deploying technology, from actually managing tech, using it, and also the type of impact that it has. And you can't have a conversation about including women if they are not part of the decision makers, if they are not in those particular roles, for example, as founders. I say this as a former co-founder of a legal tech startup that was focused solely on access to justice matters, particularly for small businesses. And so you can't have that particular conversation because you are one of them. So for example, me, I understood it because I'm a woman of color and I was young and I'm a lawyer. And I understood that most of legal services or access to legal information, people who look like me had challenges accessing to it. And that's what actually drove me to legal tech and innovation. So it's really about creating awareness and allowing women to be part of the conversation. And it's also critical for us to understand that it's not a solo game. You know, there are a couple of people that are involved in this particular process. I'm talking about organizations, for example, like Women in Tech Global. They recently actually had one of their global awards. So I sit on the advisory board, and one of our key drivers on it for us is to actually impact young girls and give them access to technology. And you can't do that if you're not being intentional around how you're actually getting to those rural areas, around actually corporates coming on board, giving organizations like that, for example, a laptop, so that a young person can actually understand and navigate technology and be able to interface with it. We can't have a conversation if, let's say, ecosystem builders are not involved. So for example, on the African continent, I mean, we have a lot of funders. One of them was solely focused on access to justice type of initiatives. I'm sure Rhoda knows of them is HAIL. I'm also an alum from them. So those are key critical partners that are part of the conversation, and it actually makes the barrier to entry much easier, not only for female founders, but for also the people that they're trying to develop the technologies for, purely because we understand that actually getting access to legal services, affordable and quality legal services and information is a challenge, a huge one at that.
So you're talking about partnerships, right? Because you mentioned corporate. So those donors then what? Provide, like you said, laptops or phones, they get the equipment to people. And then there's also the training that's involved. And is that a lot of the focus of Legal Interact where you are now?
Well, focused. So we build a lot of technologies specifically geared across the entire legal ecosystem. So, so not only for in-house legal teams, for example, from, you know, when you mentioned case management and drafting contracts. I'm like, hey, she's talking about us. So we build things like that. But I think from a legal or rather access to justice conversation, what is more appropriate in terms of what we're doing is around the solutions that are catered for law firms, because there's a ripple effect around how lawyers work. And I think the most problematic thing, and I say this having been a practicing attorney in a law firm, is that the whole business model around how we work is broken. And because of that, it actually doesn't make sense. The fact that I'm chasing hours, whereas the end goal should actually be serving you in the most effective way as possible. And sometimes that's actually, I'd like to believe, a conflict of interest, because if I choose to spend less time on your matter, I'm not going to get paid as much versus, you know, the billing model. And so the conversation around that for me has always been, look, if you're employing technologies as a law firm, you're actually able to do more for far less and actually have greater impact. And that can actually open up other streams of increasing your revenue if that's what you're concerned about. But impact is there. There is a ripple effect around actually deploying technologies within law firms, because it makes it easier for people to interface with lawyers. It can't be that I'm dealing with a divorce and I have to run after my lawyer in order to get an update on my matter. Whereas if there are technologies involved that actually make it easier, much like what we do, that makes it easier for you to actually get access to your matter, understand what is happening, and for you to get updates, then, you know, it makes sense. So, you know, there's that conversation around the system itself, but like I said, it's not a one-man job, it's not a one-woman job. There's a lot of key role players that are involved. We're talking about even our court system. Recently in South Africa, we launched Court Online. So that is like a case management type of tool that's actually geared for litigants to whatever process that we typically do around issuing of summons, getting our court dates and so forth. Now it's actually been digitized. Of course, it's new. Of course, you know, there are a bit of challenges, but that is encouraging, because that means that an unrepresented person can actually find a way in order to navigate the system in a way that is user-friendly, in a way that will actually also help them get the necessary type of access that they need.
So that online system is very important and helps equalize things for people. And let me ask you this final question before I move on to Nancy. So is there a place then for law firms to, since they can be more efficient, since things are digital, where they can then do more pro bono work, that is, provide services or information to women at no cost? That's what I mean by pro bono. Does that help open up that space?
In a perfect world, ideally it would be. I mean, even in South Africa, there's a certain set amount of hours that we have to do. With the new Legal Practice Act that actually came about a couple of years ago, they actually made it mandatory during our training that, you know, there's a set amount of vocational hours that you need to put in. So at least from a policy and legislative perspective, there is some push, but ultimately, I mean, you can have the best laws in the world, but it's execution where it matters. So I think it's about really being able to incentivize law firms to actually do that. I know it may be vague, but conversations around, hey, brand goodwill. I mean, if it speaks to them and their corporate, it would make sense for them, but at least you would reach your end goal around, you know, opening up the space for pro bono services.
Thank you, Leah. That was very helpful. Nancy, I want to turn to you. Share with us what you do, and also what are the main lessons learned from the use of technology for access to justice, which can be used to advance women's rights?
I'm a legal advisor in the Commonwealth Secretariat, working with member states to help improve their access to justice by addressing issues of case backlog, complexity, costs, and creating alternative pathways to justice. So adoption of alternative forms of dispute resolution. And I think what we've seen from how different countries responded to COVID-19 is that technology, of course, has a role to play. Many courts that had previously not adopted online courts, even as Leah mentioned, had to resort to online courts for proceedings, for hearings, for taking pleas with prisoners. And I think that is that has been very helpful. And in terms of its impact on for women and access to justice and going forward, you'd find that perhaps one of the blind spots, I think Rhoda mentioned, when technology is adopted, how pre-existing prejudices against vulnerable people, including women, can be exacerbated. So what happened in the pandemic period for many countries is the prioritization of certain cases. And so what was deemed urgent was prioritized. And in many cases, those may be cases that involve women and domestic violence, were not necessarily at the top of the list. Succession matters which have an impact on women and the family may not have been deemed as urgent cases. And so I think with the adoption of technology, we can still proceed with our blind spots. And so the issue is to be cognizant of that and to try and see how do we be aware of the blind spots and put in place mechanisms to address them. So for example, when we're when actions were being taken to decongest, cells and police cells and prisons. Who are those being released? Are they people who might, put women and women's rights at risk? When we are having video conferencing between the courts and prisons, how do we also ensure that, for example, women who get caught up in laws that are seen to be discriminatory against women, for example, things to do with petty offenses, how can they be beneficiaries of such efforts of decongestion of prisons and detention centers, but also in the use of video conferencing for testimony from expert witnesses. We have seen cases of where technology pre the pandemic and even through the pandemic, how adoption of technology such as video conferencing helped address cases of backlog. Because the expert witness is available to give their testimony wherever they are. That could be, the pathologist, the medical examiner, or a doctor in cases of sexual violence or domestic violence, who's not able to travel to the court, or even for victims and witnesses who are not able to travel to courts because of physical distance. If they're facilitated, they're able to give evidence wherever they are. And so that could have has a positive impact on cases involving women, for example, in cases of domestic violence and sexual violence. And also in succession matters, which the previous panelists have mentioned as cases that are of interest to women. You would find that you're able to give your evidence wherever you are, participate in the case without necessarily having to travel, because we do know in many countries, physical access to courts is an issue because high courts or other courts with certain jurisdiction are not accessible throughout the country. So distance becomes a physical barrier to access to justice. So having the ability to do online hearings, to give testimony from wherever you are, that has been very helpful. And also in cases where courts previously were struggling with, having the ability to protect witnesses in particular cases. I think adoption of technology through video conferencing, online hearing is definitely something to be celebrated. So I think if there are more investments in such facilities for the courts, because technology does come with a cost, I think we can continue to see greater gains for women seeking justice through the courts.
You make very important points about, how this technology has actually been helpful with expert witnesses and then the use of mediation. Do you see that it is being embraced? Since you're with the Commonwealth, I'm not asking what it is in the future, but do you see that more countries are being made aware of these issues and these challenges for women, or at least recognizing that there's an obligation they have to help shed light on this blind spot?
What has happened is that, particularly because of the pandemic, and when courts, like everybody else, shut down, and then we realized that they are essential services and must continue. And in that continuation and choosing criteria for which are the services to continue is when issues such as domestic violence, were raised across the world, just seeing how there was an increase in cases of domestic violence because of the lockdown situations. And as courts and economies began opening up, the issue has been, how do we ensure that the issue of cases specifically affecting women, vulnerable people in our community are not put on the back burner to prioritize other cases. So I do believe that this is something that many member states are grappling with. Civil society organizations are raising those issues of backlog, and in a situation of limited resources in terms of judges and magistrates, but also limited resources in terms of technology of which cases to adopt, I do believe that some of these cases that affect women should be amongst the things that, as judges and lawyers and the legal community in different countries sit down to prioritize, that they should not be put on the back burner. We should not continue exacerbating differences by perhaps maybe prioritizing commercial cases over other cases such as domestic violence and others that have an impact on women.
Yeah, and the points that you're making, that same awareness in the United States, women in the same situation in terms of in the back seat and how we're affected, and we are recognizing how important it is to try to fill that blind spot here. So it's a worldwide, I think, recognition of what needs to be done. And that sets us up, especially your last comments about the courts and the role of the courts and the recognition and what we learned from the pandemic, to turn to Tatiana, because the Global Judicial Integrity Network that UNODC created aims to address different judicial integrity challenges faced by judges and judiciaries worldwide. In the context of your work, Tatiana, once you share with us exactly what you do there, have you identified any integrity-related challenges linked to the use of digital technology or artificial intelligence, and in particular, linked to gender and women's access to justice? Tatiana?
Thank you, Judge Williams. Good afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are. I'm really pleased to be part of this panel, and thank you to the Institute for African Women in Law for this great initiative and also for your invitation to join you today. So I work for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, where I coordinate the activities of the aforementioned Global Judicial Integrity Network. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the network, as the name already suggests, our main area of work is judicial integrity. And in particular, we try to support judiciaries in strengthening integrity of judges. And in particular, we aim to create a space for judges to come together, to jointly identify and address challenges related to integrity that they face, and in particular share experiences and good practices. And we have been covering a variety of topics linked to judicial integrity, but the one that is most relevant for today's session is the ethical use of artificial intelligence. So the question for me was, in essence, whether there are linkages between judicial integrity, gender, new technologies, and AI. And in short, the answer to that, I believe, yes, there are strong linkages. Technologies undoubtedly have the potential to bring more transparency and accountability in the justice system, and also help minimize opportunities for corruption. For example, where there is a computerized case management system, it reduces the possibilities to tamper with evidence, to lose documents, or to ask for illegal fees to retrieve documents. And we see that judiciaries around the world are introducing at different levels of complexity and with different intensity various new technologies or AI-based solutions for tasks such as automatic classification or prioritization of cases, case assignments. And again, here, integrity related fact is that then there is little room for interference with which judge would preside over which case, evidence analysis, etc. But it is of utmost importance that any new technologies or AI solutions promote and do not undermine access to justice, the right to a fair trial, and the principles of equality and non-discrimination. Therefore, judiciaries should understand the potential risks that the new technologies and AI might bring. And indeed, some of these challenges or considerations might be gender-related. And as we know, some of the common gender-related issues in the judiciary are, for example, sexual harassment, discrimination, biases, stereotyping, sextortion, etc. And these issues should not be perpetuated by the use of new technologies and AI. And for example, AI applications crave data. They are fed data sets, including from previous cases, and based on them, they identify patterns and make predictions. But it means if the data sets include biases, discrimination, or stereotyping, then the suggested outcomes will do so as well. And as an example, we know that, for instance, for gender-based violence cases, there is a history of discrimination in a sense, among others, that women were not considered reliable witnesses. So if we then rely on the data of the past cases, it could result that the new technologies and AI actually perpetuate discrimination and maybe incorrectly discredit testimonies of women. Another example is also what was mentioned now by Nancy, and that's the classification of cases, and that some AI solutions are used to decide which cases will be dealt with as a priority and it can happen that the technologies might not classify gender-based violence cases or child custody cases as urgent, which of course then could have serious consequences for women's access to justice, could also cause physical harm to those involved, and also generally discourage women from even trying to seek justice in courts. And there are also other linkages between technologies and women's access to justice, and the other speakers, I think, covered it excellently. And I'm also very delighted to hear about the great initiatives that are going on around the world to empower women and to make their access to justice easier. But from the integrity point of view, I would just reiterate that the new technologies and AI can be great tools, but they should also be used carefully so that they do not negatively impact on equality, impartiality, and the rights and freedoms of women seeking justice. And the Global Judicial Integrity Network has been raising awareness about these issues. So I would encourage anyone interested in this topic to visit our website to find out more. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just had a couple of follow-up questions. One, you talked about certain biases that could creep into cases dealing with gender violence or custody cases. One of the things that the data can track are the numbers on that. So if you see a very low, like you could track individual judges, right? You can see what the results are or the outcomes of the trial, and then try to see if that might reveal a judge's bias. Is that right? Is that one way it could be used positively?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have exactly answer to this angle, but it's certainly interesting and something that we want to understand more. We are a little bit at the beginning of the journey of collecting the ways that integrity might be implicated. And exactly, I think the starting point is to first really map out what are the different considerations that integrity and women's access to justice might be impacted, and then look for solutions. But certainly this is a new topic where there are so many questions and so many factors that should be taken into consideration. And we exactly in the network, we try to start with the discussion so that judiciaries around the world have an idea what are the different aspects they should look at, including the one that you mentioned.
Yeah, and you're going about it in a very methodical, careful way, you know, analyzing it step by step, which is so helpful, not rushing into it. And you mentioned women and access. So one of the things that courts can consider is perhaps making computer terminals available at the court, laptops available at the court for women, for example, who may not be able to get connected, who may not have a laptop, who may not have a phone, or who are frightened and cannot use the, you know, the computer of the man that they live with or that they're related to. I mean, aren't courts also looking at that aspect, what the courts can do at the courthouse to help in this area?
I think that judiciaries around the world have this responsibility to make justice accessible to everyone. And technology is certainly a great way to do that. It has a great potential to create more transparency, more equality. And there have been a lot of efforts around judiciaries exactly to equip the courts with new technologies. We also see accelerated implementation of new technological advancements after the COVID pandemic, and different efforts in the area of different digital documents and e-filing, access to computers, etc. And I think there is no one-size-fits-all approach. I think every judiciary should really carefully assess what are the needs of their jurisdiction and try to develop strategies on how to really promote access exactly in a way that is needed. And with regard to the pandemic, really try to draw from the key lessons arising from the pandemic so that the digitization is efficiently used while at the same time ensuring that it is benefited by everyone, including women, from these new technologies.
Thank you for that, Tatiana. And now I want to open up for a couple questions to everyone, and then perhaps take some questions from those who are listening. What do you see as the future of innovative use of technology in expanding women's rights to justice?
I just wanted to add to also, in answering your question, to also add to what Tatiana has mentioned. Generally, what we're saying is that, technology can most likely just reflect existing divisions or vulnerabilities in a community. So we must not be blind to that. And so one of them is even access to that technology, assuming that users have phones, access to smartphones or laptops or computers. And so in some countries, and if I use Kenya as an example, what has happened is the courts within the court premises themselves, they do have computers that members of the public can use, for example, at the customer care desk. And within the country, they are citizen service centers. They're called Huduma centers, which are service centers, where citizens access, apply for national ID, apply for passports and other such things. So in such centers, as well as internet cafes, they can access judicial services there, legal services there. So I think that is one way of penetrating communities without assuming that every user has access to technology in their home or on their person. But also different uses of technology. I know we are, even at the moment, relying on smartphones and laptops, but one way that information can be made broadly available is also via SMS platforms. And I think this is an area in which mobile money has been very successful in the African continent. It doesn't necessarily rely on smartphones, but you can use mobile phones to, send money from one person to another. Therefore, learning from that, how can we use that technology, the most basic technology, not necessarily relying on internet connectivity to disseminate legal services and legal information. And I think by having that question at the back of our minds, we would be able to reduce some of the inequalities that would exist in terms of reaching previously or historically disadvantaged members of our communities.
And then I'm going to call on Rhoda to just talk about the law box concept for Barefoot Law, and then Leah. Rhoda, because that's one of the big innovations at Barefoot.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to actually jump in and reiterate Nancy's point in that, as we're designing these solutions to be open and flexible to kind of the confluence between, tech solutions and traditional methods, such as, like you mentioned, SMS and voice blasts. And so one of the things that we, in our designing process and being cognizant of these unconscious biases and try to mitigate some of the barriers that we realize women face, is to actually have a mix between a physical presence that's still connected to, that still has an ultimate tech-based solution. So at Barefoot Law, we're currently rolling out what we're calling the law box, which is literally a kind of a rigged container, storage container that we have placed in a grassroots community up north in northern Uganda. And its purpose is not only to, present the community with a physical idea of our work, but to serve as a point between the community there and our team of lawyers back in Kampala. So for people that don't have, the internet, or even have their own, phones, because that's also another issue in and of itself. Like, people just don't even have simple feature phones. They have a point in which they can come, and that's at the law box, and they're able to have a conversation with our team of lawyers about, whatever legal problems they may be facing, and go through that process of resolution without having to, actually travel or needing these tools themselves. But in saying that, I think one thing that we also need to be, cognizant of is having community context. And so knowing the users that, you're endeavoring to serve, because an example of the system at the law box, we had an appointment system that we put in place where while users came and wanted to interact with our lawyers, at the first point is we're like, oh, we'll make an appointment system, and you come and see the lawyer at this time. But then we didn't realize that by the time the user has come physically to the law box, they've taken time away from something else that they could be doing that's crucial, and sending them back essentially is it's perpetuating that problem, and part of becoming part of a barrier that they're facing. And so as we were thinking through how best to improve the service, one was to completely do away with the appointment system, such that anyone who shows up can speak to a lawyer then and there. So yeah, I think being in addition to being flexible and merging traditional and tech-based solutions, also being able to truly understand the context of the community that you're serving is crucial.
Well, thank you for that. And I just see we had a judge, Njeri Thuku from Kenya, who shared with us that she is responsible for the customer care desk, and there are 2 desktops that assist litigants who come to court and assist them in accessing the virtual courts. And I think courts have to have these help desks in this age in order to help people who are illiterate or who don't have an understanding of the courts. And I'm going to turn to you, Leah, because we've also had a question. You can comment on this, but people want to be part of the conversation. How can they be a part of the conversation at the decision-making table as you look into the future? Leah?
I think what's important about that is really beyond just allowing spaces such as these for women to actually talk about this, because women, we talk a lot and we actually connect, particularly with things that we're passionate about. So it's about finding your spaces and where you can actually connect with things that you belong in. So for example, with the Women in Tech, where I sit, it's something that I'm passionate about in terms of representation of women, sitting around a table, making decisions that can actually have impact on a cause that actually matters. And I just had a couple of thoughts on your previous question around the future of, so my thinking is really, and I think Nancy literally took the words out of my mouth, and then Rhoda just came and closed it off. But I think the essence of it is about decentralizing the entire system, because the more you cannot have innovation if everything stays stagnant. So the moment you decentralize legal services, that is where actually you can unlock the access to justice that we are harping on about, purely because then you have real players that are actually in the conversation. For example, I actually just saw now we have someone from GIZ in Zambia. Next month, I'm in Zambia. They're unpacking the work that they're doing in legal technology and legal aid space. And they actually are making effective use of their paralegals. So, those type of things, those type of nuances around actually decentralizing how we give legal services, how we actually provide legal services to people who actually need them, not only from who actually does the servicing, but also in the way that we do it.
Well, I thank you for that. And I see our clock is ticking. And I wondered if there's anyone else that wanted to comment? I don't know, Tatiana, is there anything you wanted to add before we go to the wrap up? You've got about 1 minute.
Maybe very quickly, and of course, I speak from the integrity point of view, so it's more about case management systems, case assignment systems, so they don't perpetuate biases and discrimination, and or predictive justice, etc. And just from that point, when you ask about the future of the innovative tools, just one idea came to my mind, that judiciaries should bear in mind that new technologies and AI should serve the justice, not rule over justice. What I mean is that judiciaries should be aware that predictions might be inaccurate or wrong, and even if they are correct, they should not impair the fundamental rights and freedoms. And therefore, judiciaries need to have in place sufficient legal safeguards so that the outcomes of these new technological solutions can be contested or appealed against, so that really these tools serve the judiciary, not rule over judges' discretion.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. As you can see, we could spend a whole day on this. There is so much meat here. And on behalf of the Institute for African Women in Law, I thank you, all the participants who have joined us today. We've seen your comments in the chat section. And I agree with you, it has been a very lively discussion on women, technology, and access to justice, and an informed discussion. And it's been informed because we've had such terrific panelists. And I want to thank all the panelists for offering their valuable insights and sharing their wealth of knowledge on the topic. I also want to give a shout out to the Institute for African Women in Law and what it's been doing over the years. As a Pan-African, nonprofit, non-governmental organization, it is committed to supporting the works of women in law across the continent of Africa and the diaspora, with the goal of being a focal point for addressing issues across the legal and judicial professions. IAWL works to enhance potential, to nurture leadership, to create opportunities, to build strategic partnerships through coalitions, innovative programming, and knowledge production. As much as we've delved into the countless barriers women face in assessing justice, even with technology, this panel discussion has proven how vital it is for technology, even in its most basic form, to be available for women across the continent who don't presently have access to justice. And so we've talked about how important it is to decentralize the system, that one system doesn't fit all, that there's a role for not-for-profits, for law firms, for the judiciaries, for all the stakeholders to make sure there's a seat at the table for women and women's rights as we advance in this technological age. I am very thankful for all of you for participating and joining the discussion. And if you would like to participate in more events, please visit the African Women in Law website for more information. And with that, we will sign off. I think we're right on time. That's one of the things when I was a full-time judge, always tried to bring things in on time, and we did. And that's because we had such terrific panelists who know what they're talking about. So thank you again for all of you who are listening, and for all the panelists for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you.